The following story has been brought to you by StoriesToInspire.org.
I want to tell you a beautiful story because it's so simple and so small, yet so powerful. This woman's name was a real name. Her name was Claire Shiner. Claire Shiner was a girl who, when she was 18, 19, and 20 years old, really dreamed of life like everybody else. But when she started to turn into 35, 40, and 45, and 50 years old, and still wasn't married, she started to realize that it's going to be very hard for her to ever have a child of her own. But when she's 10, she's dreaming of having that child. But she realizes it's not going to happen, and she probably won't ever get married. And so she made this decision. She says, I have to take care of a child. I need to have a foster child. I don't know where I have to get a hold of a foster child. And I want to take care of a child. And I don't want to take care of any child. I want to take care of one specifically that has a disability. So Claire did her research. And there was a family, this is a real name, a Hasidic family called the Freund family, who gave birth to a baby boy. The baby boy was born with something called spina bifida, I think it's called. It's a disease, I believe, in the spine that makes him be very physically and mentally challenged. At that time in the Hasidic community, it was extremely embarrassing to have a child like that. You wouldn't go out in public. You wouldn't let everyone know. Your daughters would never get married if they knew that. And so the family decided, we can't bring this child home. And so Claire decided that she's going to provide the foster home for this young boy. And so right out of the hospital, Claire wheeled this little Raphael to her home. And she took care of him. And she raised him. And she bathed him. And she cleaned him. And she dressed him. And she fed him. And she made sure to raise him exactly like the family wanted, in the Hasidic way, and shave off all his hair and give him pe'ot and do it only the way the Hasidic, the food that they would eat. And she took care of him, and she took him out in public, and she took him for walks in his wheelchair in the park, and she took him in the afternoon and took him in the morning, and she'd walk around all day with him. And when the boy was 7 years old, the parents decided that they want him back. And so they took little Raphael back into their home. And Claire was very disappointed. But the parents then took him and raised him. And actually, when he was 16 years old, he passed away. So now, in June of 2013, that's a year and a half ago, Claire Shiner passed away. And when she passed away, Rabbi Freund got up to speak at her funeral. And he said, all of you in this room think that here's a girl, here's a woman who lived life alone, really couldn't accomplish much, and she passed away. He says, let me tell you the real story. When Claire goes up to heaven right now, I can't tell you how many children she's going to greet. And the crowd's looking like, what's he talking about? He says, let me give you a little explanation. He says, we had our son Raphael, and like everybody else, we didn't want anyone to know we had him. And so we gave him away for foster care because we couldn't go out in public with this boy. He says, when he was 7 years old, my wife and I looked at each other and said, look at this woman and look what she's doing for our child. If she could love him in public, how could we not? And that's why we decided to take him back. He says, the first Shabbat, Minyan starts, Hasidim start late, Minyan starts at 9:30. I decided I am bringing my son to shul, and I specifically came late. I walked in at 9:45, carried my son, and carried him all the way to the front of the room. And I put him down, and I felt my cheeks turning beet red. Hundreds of people are looking at me, and who's this man, and who's this kid? He says, a few days later, a man called me up. He says, my wife just gave birth to a daughter with Down syndrome. And the only reason why I had the courage to take care of this child is because of what I saw you do this past Shabbat. 2 weeks later, for the next few weeks, I brought him to shul every single week. 2 weeks later, another boy showed up in shul. And 3 weeks after that, another 2 of these children showed up in shul. And then 2 months after that, 5 of them were there, and 7 of them were there. And you'd walk in the park in Monroe, and you'd see people, children out, and families about, and families holding their children's hands. And then dozens and dozens and dozens of children started to come out of the woodwork. And then I started to realize that my son can't get a Jewish education because there's no school that has the facilities for someone like my son. So I decided to open an institution and open a school, so Sharei Chemla, which is going to house these children. Today, Sharei Chemla has 250 students in their school. He says there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids who walk through the doors of our school. All of those children are getting taken care of just because of Claire. Life is awesome if your neshama inspires your spirit, which inspires your life. Every single person has to know the answer to know those 2 important days. The day you were born is extremely important, only if every day you walk around with understanding why you were born. Thank you.
Enjoyed this story? Come again. Bring a friend. StoriesToInspire.org